Uh, Hi, everybody. Welcome to the WGA Controversy at Noon, where today we're talking about book banning, censorship, and, of course, the implications of the Alberta Ministerial Order of July 24th, Order 30 of 25, called Standards for the Selection, Availability, and Access of School Library Materials. I am sure there's going to be a lot we can say about that. Our panelists today, in the order that they're appearing on my screen here, are Gail de Vos, a storyteller, author, librarian, and educator; Ira Wells, a writer and associate professor of art and of literature at Victoria College at the University of Toronto; and currently the president of PEN Canada; and of course Malcolm Azania, Minister Fast, who is an award-winning novelist, print journalist, radio host, producer, television host, and a lot more. So welcome to all of you. The WGA's land acknowledgement has played in the loop material, but I would like to add that I am personally aware that we are working on Indigenous lands, and so we are also drawing in viewers probably from many territories in Canada, throughout Canada. So yes, we are aware of that, and thank you for everything that means and for the responsibilities that places on us. So I'm going to ask the panelists to start by giving a few brief or introductory remarks to orient the discussion, and then we'll move in from there. We'll see how the discussion goes, but please feel free to post comments during the conversation, and we'll try and draw them into the conversation as we can and see how much time there is for Q&A at the end. So, Malcolm, can you take us away?
Sure. Well, just wanted to make sure I'm unmuted. So yeah, and my last name is pronounced Azania. So I guess since you'd asked for brief, very, very brief opening remarks, I'd say that we are facing the stunning crisis of the international fascism, which has its sadly a lot of welcome participants right here in this province and some right here in this city. And that is coinciding with the rise of AI and a tech bro technocracy, in which a small number of ultra rich people who are very arrogant are deciding, although they have no expertise in public policy or education, to insert themselves in ways that are absolutely not defending freedom, but are only defending their concentration of profit. So we have a rise of people proclaiming the love of free speech when really the case is clear that they love hate speech, but actually working to ban books and ban public expression. So it's a very strange time. I never thought that in the year 2025 we'd be dealing with this, but here we are.
Ira, could you pick up from there?
Absolutely. Thank you, Peter, and thanks, Malcolm, for starting us off. I would just say by way of introduction, something that everyone knows, which is that the government of Alberta is not being straight up with the voters of Alberta. They say that this is about imposing consistent province-wide standards for school libraries, as though this were about the selection of books, but it is in fact about the removal of those books, and that matters. Definitions matter. Book banning occurs when someone removes a title from a library because they consider it harmful or morally offensive. And Alberta's initiative is clearly an instance of book banning and censorship. Those are the words we should use, regardless of the slippery language that the Alberta government is engaging with. The second point I'd make is that the tactics and the approach here are quite obviously taken from an American playbook. I know Peter wants to keep us focused on Alberta, and I promise to do that. But I just wanted to point out that playbook begins but does not end with school libraries, that public libraries are also under attack in the United States. And I think it's important to think about the ways in which public libraries in Alberta may also be vulnerable and to bear in mind that there may be a coming phase of this initiative. So what do we do? How do we organize? How do we stand up against this kind of thing? The much more to say on this topic. Maybe just a couple of introductory thoughts. I think there are personal and then collective actions that we can take, insofar as we can personally, to stand up for banned authors, for librarians, and to be publicly making the kinds of arguments that we can. I can say that having spoken to some of the authors who have gone through the process of being banned, that it can be devastating and exact an emotional toll to be told that your uh, award-winning children's book, which may be very autobiographical and very tied to your own personal experience, is in fact a work of pornography, or worse, that it is somehow part of some grooming process. That this book banning might feel abstract, it might feel large, but it's quite onerous and personal for the writers involved, and we should stick up for them and speak up for them. We need to stand up for our librarians. Part of the reason why we have arrived at this place is because those library positions have been underfunded for a long time. There often are not librarians in schools who have a sort of overarching perspective on the curation process. So we need to get involved with the organizations, with the bodies that are making those decisions, join school boards, join library boards, join municipal boards that we can. We've been coasting along for too long, I'm afraid. And in some contexts, some jurisdictions, there has been a kind of takeover. So we need to make this a little more difficult for our opponents. We need to stand up for our perspectives on these issues. Now, the librarians and the others who are involved, who are now on the front lines of this, who are being asked to implement this order, I think could use some support and some coaching from our side, which is to say that when they confront a book that might run afoul of the rules, and you have to think there will be dozens or hundreds or thousands of these questions that may be arising, specific questions of does this particular graphic novel run afoul of this order? There will be some who will want to remove that book in order to spare themselves the pressure and the trouble and the difficulty, the anxiety about their own positions, and so on. And this becomes what the scholar Timothy Snyder calls anticipatory compliance. The idea that you start complying with authoritarian overreach, maybe even going above and beyond where you had to go because you're not sure where that line is drawn. I think we can maybe provide some help there. We also need broader societal approaches. What do I mean by that? Anti-book banning legislation, lawsuits. Are we satisfied that the government's action here actually is in compliance with Section 2 of the Canadian Charter? The legal context in Canada is different from the US, obviously. So there may be different kinds of opportunities for legal challenges here. Also, unlike the United States, we are a signatory of the UN Convention of the Rights of the Child, Article 13 of which specifies that children have the right to seek, receive, and impart information of all kinds. Is the province of Alberta now in contravention of the UN Convention of the Rights of the Child? That seems to me that is an open question. These are questions that might have a legal forum. There are also questions that might be taught in our schools. This might be an opportunity for students and teachers to think about these norms and about these rights, these international conventions, and think about the place in which their province now finds itself. So finally, there's the broader political question in which the citizens and the voters of Alberta now have to ask themselves, and I say this as someone whose roots in the province run deep. I grew up in Alberta, spent the first 25 years of my life there. Whether the citizens are okay with their elected officials having a mandate to cull the province's libraries according to their own values, right? That seems like an extraordinary power for this government to confer upon itself. And voters need to ask themselves how they will feel when that power changes, and we now have this precedent. So, when the NDP come into power, they presumably then just cull all the books from the opposite direction. This is not a healthy position for democracy to be in, and we need to be pushing back against all kinds of book banning and be much more forceful there. So that's probably rather too much to be throwing at you right off the bat, Peter. But I hope I haven't extended too long, and we'll turn it over to Gail.
Thank you. And you said a lot of what I was going to say, so I'll keep it very brief. I'm just going to come from the librarian's point of view. I am a librarian, but I don't work in a library. I teach in the library school and have for 30 years or more. Yes. And all my courses on comic books and storytelling and children's literature involve teaching librarians and educators about intellectual freedom. I also go on school visits, particularly as a storyteller, to talk to students as well as staff members about the process, the issues. I was talking to Merle Harris, and you know her, Peter. We have been working since 1992 collecting censorship challenges across Canada in school libraries. We were working with Dr. David Jenkinson, David Jenkinson from the University of Manitoba. So we've been looking at this issue for a very long time. It's gotten worse, I know. I mean, 3 of the 4 books that are used as, oh my God, I've seen have been, well, they've all been textbooks in my courses. They're all memoirs. They're personal stories. And now you're talking about people who have, well, are effectively censored themselves for living their lives. So there's all sorts of other options for discussion. And I think you're right. We need to have those discussions in classrooms and in libraries and with the public. Librarians and intellectual freedom go hand in hand, and that's the important part for me.
Well, we're between or among us all, you've covered a lot of territory here. Let's see how we can start undoing that. Malcolm, I'm going to start with you because you said that this is not about free speech, and although you didn't directly mention it, what strikes me here, as in the US, and I don't think we can get away from what is happening in the US, even though I want to focus on Alberta because it is so much a playbook taken out of the US and specifically Florida to start off with. But the state is presenting itself as a sole arbiter of morality, and what concerns me here is how the devolution or the directive to address it in school libraries is taking where governments are directly responsible to the citizens and are covered very strictly by the legislation. The minute you devolve it, you become less open to that kind of attack. It's just more layers in between. So what I'm really after is what happens when the state presents itself as the sole arbiter of morality in these cases, as it does here?
Well, I mean, what we see is what we've gotten, which is an arrogant provincial authority that claims to know what's best for everybody, even though it's led by somebody who claims to be a libertarian. So that should be the opposite of her values. And somebody who used to claim that as a libertarian and as a social liberal, fiscal conservative, whatever that unicorn is supposed to be, that she was on the same side as people in the queer community. But we see that the so-called cultural war manifests here as specifically a desire to attack queer people. And it does so under the guise of claiming that queer people are pedophiles. That's always the hidden attack. That's the real thing that they're going after. And, it's worthwhile pointing out the hypocrisy, since so often what we see among fascists and the ultra-right is a vast network of actual pedophiles and pederasts who are harming children. And certainly the massive, I'm going to refer again to the tech bros, the tech billionaires, because they have a super profitable system that is actually facilitating the exploitation, sexual exploitation of children around the world. And of course, that includes children right here in Alberta. So they have no moral standing whatsoever to tell us anything, pretty much about anything. And as far as, school libraries go, notice how often in the initial commentary from the government, the slippery way that the government representatives would claim that there were pornographic works available for children, and then they would slide that into saying that as if those were in elementary school libraries. Well, did they find a single example? Because if they had found a single example, presumably they would have been trumpeting that above all other things. But just like many of us have heard these foolish stories about how some child somewhere was allowed to identify as a cat and therefore had a litter box in the classroom. So any phenomenal, fabulous lie they will tell, because it's juicy, it's salacious, it sticks, it's dramatic, but they're super light on evidence. And anybody who's that light on actually proving their case, is just a liar. And these are grifters. They don't have any moral authority whatsoever. And it's critical that we push back at them at every turn, and that we are very clear that this is, 20 years ago, if you used the word fascism in a public discussion, it was easy for people to say to you, you're overreacting, you are being silly, you are hitting the panic button at all times. Well, our country, for good reason, banned a fascist organization founded by a Canadian that attempted to overthrow the US election in 2020. So the fascists are among us, and they have friends in government, and we have a provincial leader who is as cozy as it is possible to be with the fascist movement in the United States, as represented by the US president, as well as various prominent online influencers. All of this is directly connected. So moral authority from fascists to tell us what we can read and can't read, forget it. That's a non-starter.
Ira, Gail, do you want to pick up?
I can just,
from the.
that's all I can do. Ira, go ahead.
Okay, sure. I would echo Malcolm's point about the slipperiness of the way in which the argument is being made publicly by the Alberta government. And there is, I mentioned in my sort of opening that there was a playbook to this kind of thing, and one of the tactics of that public facing playbook is to take a single frame from a graphic novel or take a single page from a book, and use that to and then take a whole bunch of those together and make it feel emotionally sort of overwhelm the audience into thinking that there's some sort of inundation of pornography in schools. So that's something to recognize and call out. And the fact that the government's survey actually began with, you click a link and it shows you all these images, showed how methodologically flawed and problematic that survey was. We don't need to get into that. But to be aware that this is they're just taking that from Florida, where DeSantis employed that tactic a little while ago of decontextualizing those images. There's a history to the jurisprudence here, so that going back almost 100 years, there was a famous free speech case centering on James Joyce's novel Ulysses, in which the judge made it, is a landmark decision, and he said one of the things that you're not allowed to do when you evaluate a book for obscenity is to look at a single sentence. That you have to look at the whole book, and you have to think about, what is this book trying to do? Is this book as a whole just trying to excite the the sexual impulses of that we can unpack that. But point being is that the decontextualization of this work to try and portray it as something that it is not is a deliberate sort of rhetorical strategy that the government is using. We need to recognize that as such. That does not hold water in legal contexts, but the government is trying to pull a fast one on the people of Alberta, and perhaps with some success, unless enough of us can recognize these tactics and call them out. What else can I say? I mean, we can point out the hypocrisy. We can point out that that censorship doesn't work. That if we want to prevent children from harm, being exposed to this kind of thing, that surveys show that the average high school student is reading for about 9 minutes a day, and they're on their cell phones for like 4 to 6 hours a day, something like that. So if your goal is to prevent children from seeing a penis, you should focus on the media that they're actually consuming in great volumes, rather than the library thinking that you're making some kind of you're saving children from harm. Saving children from harm is always the way in which this is framed. So one additional thing to think about here is that we never sort of ask, well, what's the harm in pulling these books from the shelves? And it can be turned back on the government to think about the harms that censorship itself introduces. That when we claim that we're saving children from harm, when in fact we are introducing a new source of harm, specifically with regard to depriving children of narratives, of information that may have enriched their lives, right? There are legal protections for those things. We are harming children by preventing them from the solace of representation, from seeing themselves represented in texts. We're harming children by convincing them that if they see something that doesn't reflect, the values that they are being brought up in, or that they don't, that they may find challenging or upsetting, then the solution is to ban those books, or censor the authors, or ban those ideas. And I think that's an incredibly corrosive idea to instantiate as the norm for children, to teach them that censorship is the correct approach when they see something that is upsetting. And finally, that it's harmful to teach children that literature is propaganda, that it will indoctrinate you, that it will simply take you, if you read the wrong kind of book, that it will somehow take you over or indoctrinate you, change you. And I think that is also a deeply flawed way of thinking about what literature is. It's not only illiterate, it is just anti-literate, and it needs to be sort of opposed from the bottom up. So there's a few more ideas. I see Malcolm's hand is up.
Malcolm?
I see Gail's hand up, so I'm going to defer to Gail.
Okay, I'm just going to talk very briefly about the fact that most school libraries should have selection policies. And all of the things that you've been covering are in those selection policies, right? So if you go to a good, well-written, thought-out selection policy, the books that are purchased have to fulfill certain criteria. And those selection policies also include what to do when the censor calls. So I'm not sure why our government is overstepping the school boards and the individual schools by ignoring the fact that school boards and librarians and other educators and parents all have minds of their own, and have expertise, and have the wherewithal to investigate this themselves. So they've overstepped in the first place. And with that overstepping, they assume that the rest of us will just let them do it. And so going back to Malcolm, we and you, Ira, we have to stop that overstepping. But how do you do that?
Malcolm, you had your hand up. Are you?
Sure, I'll make it fast. When it comes to fascists, every accusation is a confession. So when they spend years trying to tell us that we're snowflakes, we're weaklings, we notice that they're the ones who are saying that, as you know, echoing something that Ira said, reading a book is reading any book or even a line from a book will corrupt you and ruin your life. You know, those of us who are actually teachers and who work with kids, we know that actually it's not that easy to convince any child of anything. And if it were, every kid would get all their homework done and they would all go on to vote and nobody would litter and no one would smoke. So it's just absurd to think that we could possibly be indoctrinating kids into all this stuff, unlike the tech bro billionaires who have the attention, as Ira noted, of kids. And it goes beyond 4 hours a day. I mean, it's like it can be 8, 12, 15 hours a day. A lot of kids are not getting any sleep. They fall asleep in classes. I'm not saying this is someone who's never in schools. I'm in schools constantly. So I see this happening. And this is the real danger. So if we want to do this, you know, there's some great writing on this in the book The Anxious Generation about ways that we should be restricting cell phone use in schools. And I would say, even as somebody who adores technology and is an early adopter for computers and all kinds of other things, because I'm older than I might look, I nevertheless would say fewer Chromebooks, more actual books. This is one of the ways to get kids to be reading real things and developing the critical ability to concentrate for hours at a time, or at least 20 minutes, because a device designed by billionaires to make billions of dollars to get you to do this all day long is destroying your attention span. And if you want to destroy a democracy or a society, one of the best ways to do it is ensure people can't pay attention. I mean, if you look at the crises of the scandals that have been arisen from this provincial government as well as the federal government to the south of us, any one of those things should have sunk any government a few decades ago. Some of us in this conversation are old enough to remember Gary Hart, a U.S. senator who wanted to become president, and an affair destroyed his political career. Well, now, I mean, that looks like some kind of bizarre utopia compared to what we live with today. I don't need to catalog the crimes of the U.S. government or of the scandals of our provincial government. But I'll just the last thing on this, every accusation is a confession. They love free speech, but they're the leading book banners. They say they want, you know, freedom, but they'll attack people who try to go into a public library to read to kids because they don't like how this person dresses or the gender expression of this person. They don't love freedom. They adore absolute conformity. So I think one of the things that we can do as we push, as we use humor, as we use mockery, is we should be referring to all of our work as free speech rallies and as champions of free speech, because we are the real champions of these things.
Gail, I want to come back to you a bit here and to storytelling, which is something we haven't touched on yet, because although this is about books in schools, it's about access to information there, and a lot of this comes in with storytelling and in schools, and it's the other forms of media. So do you want to touch on that a little bit and tell us a bit about how this kind of directive on book banning is going to affect storytelling, or could?
Or already has?
Already has, yes.
Just to mention, I mean, Malcolm, listening to stories, that will bring back some of that focus and attention span. So it's really important for them to listen orally as well. But I mean, I tell mostly to junior high and high school. So I'm working with stories of folk tales. I work a lot with urban legends, which is why I laughed at the reference that Malcolm did, because I've done presentations on that themselves, both in schools and in conferences. But the idea of book banning or censorship hits storytellers all the time. I'm told, we really would like you to do a Halloween show, but please do not use magic, do not use ghosts, no devils. And then, then you go to Christmas and then you got all these other things. And I keep saying, hey, but in Scotland, it's all ghost stories for Christmas. Can't I do a traditional Scottish one? No, because you don't do those things. So The more that the books are banned, the more that people are aware of the potential to censor, the more parents and schools will try. They will try and organize, they will try and limit, they will try and want you to sanitize the stories, again, to protect the children. They're not harmed. I have a hard time with it because, well, critical thinking is what we need to be doing. That's what education's all about. That's what storytelling is all about. Giving them patterns so they can relate it and take it to their own lives and develop further. Most of those folk tales are stories of identity. They're the same types of stories as memoirs are, only coached in a metaphorical way. So we're talking about the same thing. One is in print, and it's easier to take a panel or a page rather than stop somebody speaking on the stage. But they do that by preempting what you are allowed to say. And I actually refuse to do some of the storytelling now because of that.
Malcolm, you've got a hand up there.
Yeah, thank you. I really love what you're saying, Gail. And you talked about the various things that these folks want to ban. And everybody here, at least on the screen, is old enough to remember the attacks that these people made, the moral panic against Dungeons and Dragons and heavy metal albums, because these were gateways to Satanism. And then in the modern era, now leaving aside everything about J.K. Rowling, the author, and her values. Leaving all of that aside, remember, these also people were terrified that Harry Potter was going to indoctrinate their children into Satanism. So, when you have a real crisis of actual kids being imperiled by real predators, as well as by multi-billion-dollar corporations who want to hypersexualize kids and abuse them and steal their attention and their money, instead of paying attention to that, it's much easier to come up with an imaginary boogeyman. So, it's important. And, Ira talked about this before, and I'd love to hear from Ira about Penn's work in this area. But it's really important that we have been on the back foot. We have been just trying to hold on to what freedom we have left. And we need to go on the attack. We need to move forward. We need to be organizing parents and writers and kids into defending these things and to say, this is what we want, as well as, libraries that do this wonderful work with, the Freedom to Read Week and Banned Books Week and all that. We need to figure imaginative ways to extend this far beyond and to make it clear, especially to young people who will be inheriting our civilization, that the people who take away your ability to read what you want, that's just the first step. Everything is up for grabs if somebody can try to control or colonize what happens inside of your skull.
All right, Ira, I'm going to ask you, do you want to pick up on that? There are a number of threads here that I think you can speak to. The one of them being, of course, the idea of control, which you mention in your book as well, that this is not about freedom of speech, but of control of information. And this echoes what happened in the apartheid years in South Africa with control and censorship legislation there. So, do you want to pick up on that?
Yeah, thanks, Peter. You're right that it's not about the books as books. It is about control and it's about coercion. Book banning it's anti-democratic in the sense that it is about depriving people of specific information. And of course, our libraries have policies around freedom of information, and those are instantiated as part of the backbone of those institutions. But book banning it goes deeper than that. It's also fundamentally illiberal in the sense that it's about depriving you of the ability to make decisions about how you will cultivate your own mind, right? It's about depriving you of the opportunity to decide who you're going to be in conversation with, what kind of imaginative engagements you are going to be having. It's about the texture of your thinking and the kinds of mental life that you want to lead and the kind of life that you want to that ultimately you want to live. So it's profoundly offensive on so many levels. Sometimes the people who argue from the other side will say, and I want to make us aware of the kinds of arguments that are coming from the other side are, well, book banning isn't really book banning because these books are still available, or you can still get it off of Amazon, or you can still, we might have gotten rid of gender queer from all the schools in Alberta, but you can still find it somewhere online or something. Um, and the response to that is that book banning doesn't have to be total in order for it to be book banning. In other words, when we think about how book banning works, it might work in a number of ways. And the success of book banning, quote unquote, is not a zero-sum thing. The book banners might be less concerned about permanently eradicating a book from society as a whole than about temporarily limiting at the access of an impressionable youth who might have benefited from that text at a particularly vulnerable moment when they needed it the most. Um, it may also be about signaling your group affiliation in a kind of tribal way. It may be performing a kind of scapegoat type work for a group of for the book banners themselves. It may be a kind of rite or a kind of a way of flagging a kind of symbolic violence where they flag what they would purge from the society itself by purging it from the library. And simply being involved in that process is a kind of political um, rite of passage for them or a rite of belonging. So I think it's doing different kinds of work. We need to be aware of that. We need to be aware of the ways in which these groups, such as, for example, Action for Canada, are organized. If you have a look at their webpage, you see that they're very good about letting people know their rights, exactly how far they can take things, the ways in which they can publicize their views, form letters. They're good at getting people who are capturing people's interest and then allowing them to maximize their own voice. And I think that that's something that we can learn from them. We have things to learn from our opponents in this case. And I would love to see something more organized, more FAQs, some clearer sense of what we can do to amplify our own voices in this conversation. Thanks, Malcolm, for bringing up PEN Canada. I hope that I would invite everyone on this call to please join PEN Canada as we go forward in this. But we're just we are a small organization. There are many others involved. Principally librarians, teachers. I mean, you guys are on the front lines. I know there's authors on this call too. It can be a kind of whole society approach, and that's what's needed at this time.
We've been circling around a particular thing and issue here and been saying it. So, Ira, you mentioned at the beginning, you were talking about the images and how they're shaping with their questionnaire, with the initial images and framing it. And obviously it was, and the flaws in that, but a lot of this, as in South Africa, as Nadine Gordimer points out in the Index to Censorship, in her comments about South African censorship, is that these are all geared, these kinds of this imagery is geared for individuals to identify with the state and to become complicit in propping it up. So I think Malcolm, you've touched on this, and Ira as well, is that what we have to do is to not become complicit. So how do we do that?
Well, the first step to making the world that you want is actually making the world that you want. So it's absolutely necessary that at all times you live the freedom that you still possess, and you keep pushing it even further. Now, Ira talked earlier about what is sometimes called preemptive surrender. So there's an awful lot of people who, and this is also about your comment, Ira, about the the real goal of book banning. You don't need actually physically to burn every single book. That's not necessary. What you want is what fascists want, totalitarians of all types want, is to create former citizens, now complicit consumers, who are passive people who simply censor themselves. I won't read that. I won't hear that. I won't listen to that. I won't consider that. If you can dominate, it was Stephen Biko who said that the most potent weapon in the hands of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. So every time we think freely, speak freely, and act freely, we win. And it's one of the reasons why it is so necessary for us to use, from a technical and correct and absolutely historically defensible standpoint, the word fascism. This is not a joke. We can't pretend we haven't arrived at this point. We have. And so we need to be clear about who and what the enemy is. When we do that, we can harness all of the decades of, political enculturation that we received that tells us never again, that gets us to wear a poppy, not just for World War I, but for World War II, to fight against this ultimate enemy of freedom, whose goal is literally the eradication of people. Those who would ban books seek ultimately to burn them and the thoughts that go with them and the people who wrote them and write them. So if you think I'm exaggerating, I would encourage you to, read history, because that will confirm exactly what I've just said. So we can't assume. I mean, who among us in this conversation imagined 9 or 10 years ago that there would be a place called Alligator Alcatraz, what many of us call Alligator Auschwitz? Who imagined that would come to exist in the same U.S. state as Disney World? So if that is possible, and if we've reached the point where people simply accept that that is reality, then they will accept falling into the lake of fascist fire. So what I'm saying is, keep building everything that you want. Keep reminding yourself that they haven't won yet, and we still can. Because I just came across something online written by Chris Armitage that points out the terrifying reality that once fascists are elected, and apparently there's no historical exception to this, once they are elected, they cannot be removed from office peacefully. So everything that we can do to prevent them from consolidating their power saves us the trouble of the much worse step that World War II demonstrated was required in Europe. Let us do everything we can peacefully, collectively, joyfully now to build the democracy that we need, and that will save us from the horrors of what these people are trying to force upon us.
So I'm going to shift this in the last couple of minutes here. I want to shift this to, we've talked about that, but where does is underlying this is an unspoken threat on writing, publishing, and arts organizations. We have seen already disquieting rumors that organizations that protest too loudly can have their funding withdrawn. And we do see this, in fact, in 1996 with Sherilyn Stacy's How Do You Spell Abducted, where that was pushed for banning because it was considered hate literature against men. Does this sound disturbingly familiar, by the way? But funding and government support there, where does this leave publishers and writers? Who am I going to? Ira, do you want to? Shall we take you?
Sure, I don't have a huge amount to add, but would echo your concern and point out that there is the overt state-sponsored censorship that we're seeing now in Alberta. But there are downstream consequences of that, including the kind of soft censorship that you might see in publishing houses, for example. Certainly, we're seeing this in the United States, where large orders of books are suddenly being canceled, for example, or and individual publishing houses are now having to make a calculation of, if schools aren't going to be able to buy this book, can we financially justify publishing it? So that there are these ways in which censorship creeps into other kinds of decisions in the culture industry. And again, it comes back to this idea of anticipatory compliance and the need to be able to stand our ground and publicly make the kinds of arguments that need to be made at this moment, and that Malcolm has been making very eloquently, and his hand is up.
Yes.
I'm not trying to cut you off. Please continue if you have more to say.
I mean, I have a couple of sort of concluding thoughts, but I can save that for a little later on. Go ahead.
Well, I'll say simply that, and this is going to sound like I'm being silly or I'm trying to be trivial, but actually, it's always necessary to learn from successful strategies. And so, what are the various ways that we can harness and we can recruit like-minded celebrities, influencers, and others who care about these matters to be promoting books? So Oprah Winfrey was, regardless of whatever critiques we might have of Oprah Winfrey, clearly was an instrumental figure in getting a lot of North Americans to be reading certain books and to be helping those publishers to sell lots of books. Now, as Ira pointed out, there's a small number of corporate folks like the folks who run the Chapters book chain, Chapters Indigo, and if their buyers don't want a book, yes, publishers have to say, well, that's 60-70% of our sales. Amazon makes that even worse. The question is, what can we do? If we have people who love books and who are going to be mobilized because they like certain celebrities and influencers, what about a range of ways to deliver books electronically? Ebooks as well as print on demand. It is possible. Very famous author Brandon Sanderson decided after his enormous success with his work to simply independently publish his books, and he's richer than ever. Now, I'm not suggesting that is easily scalable for all of us, but what I'm saying is it is one of the routes that's open to us. So the right is absolutely doing this. You can name dozens and dozens of right-wing and fascist influencers who are pushing various books. We need to take this more seriously, and we need to be actively cultivating these networks. And we can have as much disdain as we like for the power of celebrity, but that is not going to help us. We need to be able to get those, and there are thoughtful, intelligent songwriters, authors, actors, musicians, and more who do have a public platform, and maybe no one's ever approached them and said, hey, what about this? Would you want to do your own version of a book club? Would you like to be one of the people promoting certain books that we could consider to be part of just great art or part of a freedom agenda? It's possible to do. We just need to actually start that conversation, and I would say much more is doable than we often think.
One of the problems, of course, is that with the censorship, people aren't writing. They're self-censoring. And so they're not writing, they're not producing, they're shying away from the difficult topics. They are afraid because they're going to be labeled as something else that they're not. And so one of the things we also have to do is make sure that we cherish those writers and authors and storytellers and protect them in any way that we can, because book banning is only one way of attacking. And when you look at the 4 books that Alberta has, been brought out, all of those books are old. They brought them back because they can use fear. And with fear, you can do all sorts of things. And that's what I work with the urban legends and things like that. Much of what we're talking about right now goes back to conspiracy theory, the same way of working with it. It's the same things that we're studying. Banners and conspiracy theorists walk the same walk. So one of the other things we need to do is look at beyond just the writing world, look at the folklore world, look at other worlds as well that are working diligently and continuously with the same topics, and widen our approach and make things in a safe space as well. So I agree with you, but I just think we need to go beyond, if you know what I mean.
I'm reminded here, Malcolm, you talked about creating the worlds that we want to live in and envision them. And of course, writing does that. This is what art does is to envision those kinds of words. So um, what I, again, going back to the censorship index on censorship, is that a lot of writing in South Africa happened was banned because the government feared it, and it feared it because, especially in things like the Black consciousness movement, the writing was inspirational, and it's governments, totalitarian fascist governments fear that inspirational aspect of it. So um, we've got about 5 minutes left. So I just want to say, if there's anybody who's got a question, please post it there so we can get to it. But some concluding thoughts from our panelists. Gail?
Well, basically, what I want to say is that books don't confuse children. Adults who ban books confuse children because the books themselves open doors. It's the other ones that are closing it. So what we're looking at is we can't teach critical thinking if we don't allow critical thought. I mean, it just doesn't work. You have to be able to talk about difficult things. You have to be able to approach it. You have to be able to allow children, whatever age they are, to be inquisitive and not fear them. Basically, that's it.
Ira?
Yes, I completely agree with the point that Gail just made. And seeing a good question in the chat about practical advice for bans coming to public libraries. And based on what we've seen in the United States over the last number of years, I said this off the top, but I would just reiterate that freedom to read legislation is, I think, a really important avenue to explore here before it's too late. And I would also be very interested in a more in-depth legal analysis of this issue than I can provide. I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but I would be very interested in it's not entirely clear to me if what the government of Alberta is doing here is if if they have the jurisdiction to do what they're doing. Have we actually satisfied ourselves that this is even legal, what they're doing? I would love to see a more robust legal argument made from our perspective. And I think that the defense of public libraries it would benefit from that kind of approach. I hope that people will connect and will remain in touch. I should have mentioned, I give a special shout out to the Center for Free Expression. Please do check out their work, doing all kinds of great stuff in this space. Check us out at Penn Canada. Try to win some arguments. I mean, not being a kind of internet troll, not fighting with people online, but just where you can point out that I think that the majority of Albertans still believe in democracy and still believe in free speech, and think that we can own these popular ideas, right? That when you teach a child that censorship is the solution, you're pandering to that child, and you are contributing to the erosion of democracy itself, right? Which requires the norms of expressive freedom. But those norms have to be taught. We don't just acquire them automatically, and they are in real jeopardy today. So I would just, emphasize that when you ban and trash library books, you're desecrating not only those volumes, but you're attacking what those books and libraries stand for, which is knowledge and culture and community and continuity, and those things need to be defended.
Malcolm, you answered Jeffrey in the questions there, but do you want to just pick up on that as a
Definitely. So, I love Jeffrey's question. And so I would always say to people, your community better than I do, obviously. So find the people who care about the same things that you do, and figure out the kind of things you'd like to do. Maybe you have a book fair. Maybe you have a book swap. Maybe you have authors coming in to read. Maybe you have people who love those books who are good at doing readings, and you have them perform. But whatever it is that you're going to do, you already have the ability to do some things. And every time you do that, you inspire somebody else, especially, and I cannot emphasize this enough, directly ask people to do things. It is amazing how often people will do things if you ask them. And I don't mean things that are extraordinarily difficult. I'm talking about like, oh, who else would like to host or be part of our next event? Or do you have another idea to promote free speech and love of books and so forth? There's lots of ways to do it. And although this is a very sad and rage-inducing topic, I will also say that one of the reasons we love books is because they fill our lives with so much joy. They make people who feel alone feel less alone, feel connected, and expand their minds and envisage a world that they would like to live in. So although this can be depressing, I encourage you to remember, why do you love reading? Because if you do that and then you use that emotion to drive the events that you create, you will recruit and retain far more people than if your campaign. Although, yes, it's true, I've used the word fascism a lot in this discussion. Anger is not going to sustain us in the long term. It's joy, it's love of each other, it's fun and whimsy. These are the things that we need. So do those things, connect with other people, and critically share your strategies online so that every time people want to do something, you can give them a lengthy checklist. And, there's a great website called goodfightcanada.com, and it has a whole bunch of strategies for how to fight fascism. If people will post their ideas, they will be able to teach other people.
Right. Well, in the last 2 minutes, thank you all three for a fabulous discussion. And just to remind people, look at the websites. I will copy down the websites that Malcolm mentioned here and post that as well. But please get your local writing organizations to advocate on behalf of writers and publishers. Get your other organizations, join Pen Canada, and let's work together, because ultimately the outcome of this is in our hands. So people, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Peter and panelists. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Okay, Peter, is that it? We're done here? Oh, I can't hear you. You're muted.
Yep, I see.